The sharp knock at the door jolted Mark Reynolds awake. His heart pounded as he sat up, sweat dampening his shirt. It wasn't the sound itself that unnerved him. Years of military service had trained him to wake at the slightest disturbance. It was the way it was done. Precise, repetitive, a deliberate demand for attention. He sighed and swung his legs over the bed, one foot landing softly on the carpet, the other producing a faint metallic click. It had taken him years to get used to that sound. At first, the prosthetic had felt like a foreign attachment, an unwanted reminder of what he had lost. Now it was simply a part of him, necessary, functional, his ticket to some semblance of a normal life. But normality was a luxury he had learned not to expect. Another knock, sharper this time, more impatient. Mark gritted his teeth and pushed himself upright. The rhythmic sound of his prosthetic against the hardwood followed him as he moved toward the door. He flicked on the porch light, and there she was. Karen Wilcox stood with her arms crossed, lips pursed in that practiced expression of disapproval. A clipboard was clutched against her chest like a judge's gavel, ready to deliver a sentence. The porch light cast a harsh glow on her face, exaggerating the tightness around her eyes, the meticulously controlled bob of her platinum blonde hair. She wasn't just the head of the Homeowners Association. She was its self-appointed enforcer. Mark barely had time to open his mouth before she thrust the clipboard forward. Violation notice. His fingers hesitated before taking the paper. For what? Karen's nostrils flared, and she tilted her head just slightly, as if dealing with a particularly slow student. Noise disturbance. Mark scanned the page, his eyebrows drawing together. I don't throw parties. I don't even own a stereo. What noise? Her eyes flicked down to his leg. It was a quick movement, subtle, but Mark caught it. She cleared her throat. Your movements. Late at night. They're disruptive. Mark let the words settle, the sheer absurdity of them momentarily freezing him in place. You mean my leg? Karen raised a perfectly plucked eyebrow. I mean whatever is causing that clanking sound at all hours. People are trying to sleep. Something hot and sharp flared in Mark's chest. He exhaled slowly, keeping his voice level. I'm a disabled veteran, Karen. I lost my leg in combat. You're telling me I can't walk in my own home? Karen pursed her lips. I'm telling you that the HOA has received complaints. If you're aware of the issue, it's your responsibility to resolve it. Mark let out a dry laugh. And how exactly do you expect me to do that? Karen shrugged, her expression carefully neutral. Padding? Carpet? A lighter step? It's not my job to figure that out. She gestured toward the clipboard again. The fine is $500. Failure to pay will result in further action. Mark stared at her, his pulse pounding in his ears. He had faced down insurgents, survived ambushes, endured nights of agony in a military hospital. But this smug, self-righteous woman standing on his porch, dictating how he should exist in his own home, felt like an insult too sharp to ignore. He took a step forward, watching the way Karen instinctively leaned back. Not much, just a fraction of an inch. Enough to reveal that despite all her authority, she wasn't accustomed to real confrontation. I'm not paying a damn thing, he said, his voice low and steady. Karen's lips curled into something resembling a smile, but there was no warmth in it. Only certainty. Suit yourself. She turned on her heel, stepping briskly down the porch steps. But don't say you weren't warned. Mark stood there long after she disappeared into the night, the violation notice crumpled in his fist. Mark awoke to the sharp rustling of paper against his door. The morning light bled through the blinds as he pushed himself up, his mind already heavy with frustration. He had barely processed last night's absurdity, and now, something else was waiting for him. With a sigh, he moved toward the entrance, his prosthetic making its familiar rhythmic sound against the hardwood. A bright red tag flapped against the doorframe, taped at all four corners like a warning sign. Violation notice. His stomach tightened. He tore it free and scanned the page. Trash bins left out too long. Fine. $200. ***. Mark frowned. He had taken them in the same time he always did, no different than his neighbors. His eyes flicked over the paper again, his fingers tightening around it. This wasn't about trash. As if to confirm his suspicions, another envelope lay on his doormat. He bent down, ripped it open, and his breath hitched. Lawn exceeds HOA height restrictions. Fine. $150. ***. Mark glanced at his front yard. The grass was neatly trimmed, no different from the houses on either side of him. He set his jaw. If Karen was expecting him to fold, she was in for a disappointment. But the next few days only proved that this was just the beginning. By midweek, Mark had received 4 more notices. The first accused him of having an unapproved flag display, his American flag, mounted beside his porch. The second claimed his porch light was too bright. The third cited his mailbox as being non-regulation, even though it was the same model used by half the neighborhood. The fourth? General non-compliance with community standards. Whatever that meant. It was a siege. A slow, grinding war of paperwork and petty fines. Mark knew harassment when he saw it. He had seen bullies before. Men who hid their cruelty behind protocol, who twisted rules into weapons. Karen might not have a rifle slung across her back, but she wielded her clipboard with the same smug confidence. On Friday, Mark decided to take the fight to her. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, a beige, lifeless building that reeked of stale coffee and overinflated self-importance. Mark walked in, immediately feeling the weight of a dozen scrutinizing eyes. The long folding table at the front was occupied by the HOA board, Karen seated dead center like a queen on her throne. She barely glanced at him. "You have 3 minutes." Mark exhaled slowly. "I'd like to formally dispute these fines. Every single one of them." Karen clasped her hands together, expression unreadable. "The HOA has established rules. If you fail to follow them, you're subject to penalties. That's how this works." Mark held up the stack of notices. "So explain why half of these rules don't seem to apply to anyone but me." A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Karen's expression twitched for just a second before smoothing into polite condescension. "That's an accusation, Mr. Reynolds. And an unfounded one at that." Mark scanned the room, noting the way some neighbors avoided his gaze, while others, especially the older veterans who had settled here long before Karen's reign, watched with barely concealed resentment. "Really?" Mark's voice was steady. "Because I've counted at least 6 houses with the same flag display as mine. No fines. 3 others with the same porch light wattage. No complaints. Trash bins, mailboxes, grass length. Funny how only my house is getting flagged." Karen let out a slow, exaggerated sigh. "Perhaps your attitude is the problem here." Mark let the words settle. A quiet laugh escaped him, humorless and sharp. "My attitude?" He took a step forward, leaning just slightly toward the table. "Let me be clear. I served this country. I lost a limb for it. And now, I'm being fined for the sound of my own footsteps." A heavier silence fell over the room. Karen shifted in her chair, irritation flickering across her face. "The HOA does not discriminate," she said, forcing a smile. "We enforce rules to maintain the integrity of this community. If you feel unfairly targeted, I suggest you review the homeowner guidelines. Maybe you'll find areas where you can improve." Mark stared at her. He recognized this tactic. It was the same dismissive arrogance he had seen in commanding officers who refused to admit fault, who shifted blame until the fight itself became exhausting. She wanted him to tire out, to give up. Not a chance. He straightened, tapping the papers against his palm. "I'll be filing a formal complaint." Karen gave him that same practiced smile. "Feel free." Mark turned on his heel, refusing to let her see his anger. As he walked out, the eyes of the community bore into his back. Some sympathetic, some indifferent, some afraid. By the time he reached his truck, he knew one thing for certain. This fight wasn't over. Mark sat at his kitchen table, a half-empty cup of coffee growing cold beside him, as he sifted through the mountain of paperwork Karen had buried him under. Fines, warnings, threats of escalating penalties. The sheer volume was staggering, a testament to how far she was willing to go to make his life unbearable. But Mark wasn't the type to fold. He had spent years navigating bureaucratic red tape in the military, fighting for benefits, for medical care, for basic respect. He knew how to dig, and Karen had just given him a reason to start. The first step was simple. He went through every HOA guideline line by line, looking for contradictions, loopholes, anything that proved she was enforcing rules selectively. It didn't take long to find the cracks. Karen was breaking her own rules. The HOA handbook clearly stated that all board members were expected to uphold the same standards as homeowners. But Mark had seen Karen's backyard, an oversized shed that wasn't on the approved structure list. He had noticed her front porch, lined with decorative stones that exceeded the HOA's design restrictions. And then there was the big one. Karen had personally approved a variance for her own property, a waiver allowing her to bypass a rule regarding external modifications. That wasn't just favoritism. That was corruption. Mark's lips curled into a slow, satisfied smile. He spent the next few days gathering evidence. Photos, screenshots of the HOA guidelines, copies of variance forms from the county's online records. It wasn't hard to put together a file that painted a very different picture of the woman who claimed to be the protector of the community. But he wasn't done yet. The real weapon came when he started talking to his neighbors, the ones who had been too afraid to push back before. He knocked on doors, listened to their stories. An elderly widow fined for having a potted plant too close to her driveway. A single mother charged for a playset in her yard that didn't match the aesthetic. A retired teacher who had been threatened with legal action over a bird feeder. Karen had been doing this for years. Mark recorded every conversation, every testimony. Some people were hesitant at first, worried about retaliation. But when he showed them what he had, proof that Karen had been bending the rules for herself while weaponizing them against everyone else, something shifted. Anger replaced fear. It was time to strike. Mark crafted an email, attaching all his evidence, detailing Karen's hypocrisy in bullet points so clear even the most reluctant board members couldn't ignore them. Then he sent it, not just to the HOA but to every homeowner in the neighborhood. The reaction was immediate. By that evening, the community group chat was in chaos. Messages flooded in, neighbors venting their frustrations, sharing their own experiences. Someone suggested a petition for Karen's removal. Another neighbor, who worked as a local journalist, expressed interest in running a story on HOA corruption. And then the real storm hit. Karen showed up at Mark's doorstep just after sunset, her face tight with fury. She didn't knock this time, she pounded. Mark opened the door slowly, taking his time, letting her stew in her own impatience. "What did you do?" she hissed, voice low but seething. Mark leaned casually against the doorframe. "Oh, you mean the email? Just thought people deserved to know how their HOA fees were being used." Her jaw clenched so tightly he half expected her teeth to crack. "You have no idea what you've started." Mark tilted his head. "Seems like I do. And from the looks of things, I'm not the only one who's tired of your games." Karen's hands curled into fists at her sides, but she forced a smile, the same fake one she had used at the HOA meeting, the one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "This won't end well for you," she said, voice syrupy with false politeness. Mark met her gaze without flinching. "Funny. I was about to say the same thing to you." She turned sharply and stormed off, her heels clicking against the pavement. Mark watched her go, the weight of victory settling over him. Not complete, not yet, but close. The fight wasn't over, but Karen was running out of places to hide. The HOA emergency meeting was packed. Folding chairs crammed with angry homeowners lined the community center, voices overlapping in heated conversation. The air crackled with anticipation, a current of long-suppressed frustration finally breaking free. At the center of it all, seated behind the board table, was Karen. She looked different tonight. The self-assured smirk had vanished, replaced with tight lips and darting eyes. Her usual pristine posture had wilted slightly, her fingers tapping nervously against the polished surface of the table. Mark watched her carefully, noting the stiffness in her jaw, the way she kept adjusting the nameplate in front of her as if it might shield her from what was coming. The HOA president cleared his throat, attempting to bring order to the room. We are here tonight to address the allegations brought against Karen Wilcox regarding misuse of HOA authority and selective enforcement of community regulations. Karen leaned forward, latching onto any scrap of control she had left. These accusations are baseless, she said quickly, her voice forcibly even. This is nothing more than a personal vendetta. That's a lie. Mark's voice cut through the room like a blade. He stood slowly, deliberately, holding up a thick folder. The crowd quieted, all eyes shifting toward him. I've compiled proof, he continued, his tone calm but firm. Dozens of violations Karen overlooked for herself and her friends. Unapproved structures, unauthorized modifications, fines that only seemed to land on certain people. He held up a page, turning it toward the room. Here's a variance she granted herself, allowing her to bypass exterior modification rules. Meanwhile, others were fined hundreds for changing the color of their mailbox. A murmur of outrage rippled through the audience. Karen's face paled slightly, but she lifted her chin. That's out of context. Mark flipped to another page. Here's a picture of her backyard shed. Not only is it unapproved, but it exceeds the size limit. I know at least 3 homeowners who were forced to tear down similar structures because they violated community guidelines. A man from the crowd stood abruptly. That happened to me. I had to pay thousands to remove mine, but she gets to keep hers. Shouts of agreement followed, the resentment in the room turning into a full-blown uprising. Karen opened her mouth, but the board president raised a hand, silencing her. Mr. Reynolds, he said, his expression grim. Do you have further evidence? Mark nodded. More than enough. Testimonies, photos, recordings of her admitting that certain people don't have to follow the rules. He let that statement hang in the air, watching the weight of it settle over Karen. She shrank back slightly, a flicker of panic in her eyes. Someone in the back of the room called out, "She's a fraud. We should vote her out tonight." The suggestion ignited the crowd. People stood, some shouting in agreement, others hurling accusations Karen had long managed to silence. She gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, her mask cracking completely. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, voice shrill now. "I have done everything to keep this neighborhood in order. You need me. We need fairness," a woman countered. "Not a dictator in a pantsuit." Karen's mouth opened and closed, searching for a way out, a way to claw back control. But it was too late. The tide had turned, and she was caught in the current. The board president sighed heavily. "Given the overwhelming evidence and the will of the community, I motion for the immediate removal of Karen Wilcox as HOA president." A second motion came instantly. The third. All in favor? A sea of hands shot up. Karen's face twisted in disbelief. "You can't do this," she shrieked, rising from her chair. "I made this HOA. This community will fall apart without me." The board president didn't even look at her. "The vote is final. You are officially removed from your position, effective immediately." The room erupted into cheers. Karen stood frozen, her breath coming in short, furious bursts. She turned, eyes darting wildly as if searching for an ally, a single person who might stand by her. But there was no one. Mark watched her carefully. He had seen this kind of look before, not on HOA presidents but on officers who had pushed too far, on men who had lost the respect of their troops. The moment someone realizes they're not just defeated, but completely alone. Without another word, Karen snatched her clipboard, spun on her heel and stormed out. Mark stepped outside a few minutes later, just in time to see her yanking a "for sale" sign out of her yard. Her movements jerky and violent. She looked up and saw him watching. For a second, it seemed like she might say something, lash out one last time. But she didn't. She turned, got in her car, and peeled out of the driveway. Mark let out a slow breath, the tension in his shoulders finally easing. By morning, Karen was gone. And for the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt a little bit lighter.